Chapter 33. The Calm in the Storm. Maya was at Caleb's side for long moments before Kendra could do more than gawk uncomprehendingly. She shook herself, disgusted with that hesitation, then dropped hastily to his other side. "What's wrong with him?" she asked, urgent, but not quite frantic. Maya examined him with quick hands, and at each turn Kendra's stomach lurched, expecting gore and gaping wounds. But there was nothing. Caleb's eyes burned under shuddering lids, and he was suddenly drenched in sweat, a crucible overflowing. Between heavy breaths, he made a vague gesture to his neck. Screwing up her eyes against the night, now falling in earnest, Kendra leaned in. There at his throat, unassuming and small, was a cut. The barest smear of blood surrounded the tiny puncture, yet, looking at the insignificant wound, Kendra felt as if she had sustained a mortal injury of her own. "The manticore's sting," she said. "Maya, he's been poisoned. What can we—" She trailed off, watching the dwarf's hollow expression with growing dismay. Between them, Caleb gave a rough chuckle, or maybe it was a gurgle. "Nothing to be done," he murmured. "Manticore venom is incredibly deadly. I'll be gone by morning." Tears came hot and heavy, and she felt as if she were swallowing glass. "Why did you do that?" she demanded. "I was going to go. I can't die. What don't you get about that? You didn't have to. Why did you—" As her voice rose, uncontrolled, Maya laid a hand on Kendra's shoulder and shook her head solemnly. Kendra exhaled before standing sharply. The world had a strange slant to it, a painting that hung askew no matter how she tried to right it. She dug her fists into her forehead, nails scraping against her scalp over those long ears, drawing blood. It didn't matter. She could no more hurt herself than she could help Caleb. "There must be something to be done," she snapped. Her voice was still harsh, but there was nothing for that. It was all she could do not to scream. "Maya, you have some medical herbs, don't you?" But Maya's look was grim. Adrian was crouching over Caleb now, his habitually nervous twitch stilled. A low and mournful croon fell from his throat. She wished terribly that she still had Genevieve's journal, somewhere to turn for answers, but something told her that there would be nothing to find there. No, the Witch of Words could not help her now. She had said she would meet them, but there was no sign of her. By the time she arrived, it would be too late. But Genevieve was not the only witch about, said a small voice at the back of her mind. Looking up, Kendra could scarcely see the trunk of the citadel, pregnant storm clouds blotting out the stars, but there was no doubt in her mind that just beyond, Ilya was there, waiting. She could almost feel her. "I'm going to take him to the witch," Kendra said, surprised at her own certainty. "Kendra, are you sure that's wise?" Maya asked, taken aback. "I doubt the Witch of the Wilds is going to be much inclined to help you, pardon my saying so. I don't see how there's much choice. We only have tonight, and none of us can do a thing to save him." She was reasonable, almost calm, even as she began to hastily make ready for one final ascent. "Nothing short of a miracle is going to help him now, but we know where we might find one. Boris can't move, and I can't leave him alone while he's hurt. I'll have to stay here with him. Adrian here can't change the bandages or take care of him proper, not for long. How are you going to climb your way up this tree alone in the dark? It's an awful risk to take." "Maya, I can't be killed," Kendra repeated, frustration bubbling in her belly. There's no such thing as a risk where I'm concerned. If I fall and break every bone in my body, but Caleb lives, it'll still be worth it." "You think you can't be killed," Maya objected stubbornly. "You've never taken this kind of a fall. If you take a drop from this height, you could just about make yourself breakfast before you hit the—" "I watched it pull my heart out of my chest." She winced to hear those words, shrill and sharp, but they were forcing their way out of her of their own accord in a roiling swarm. "I felt it peel off my face and eat it. Apparently, it's still walking around with it. I died again and again and again, so don't try to tell me what I can't survive, Maya. Don't you dare." "Fine," Maya said quietly, and for what Kendra thought might be the first time, the dwarf fidgeted, hands moving in anxious circles. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to suggest anything like that. But please, even if you won't worry about yourself, think about what it will mean for the garden if you go running off in the dark like this. If you fall, it might take days to get back here, and who knows what sort of hell will be unleashed by then. Who knows how long the Witch of the Wilds has left in any sort of right mind?" "I don't care about any of that," Kendra said, crossing her arms, final and immovable. "I don't care about what might be. All I know is what will be, definitely. I know that in a few hours, if I don't do something, Caleb will definitely be dead. I can't sit back and watch it happen. I owe him too much to abandon him like that." At their feet, Caleb made a murmuring sound. It might have been something like, "Don't owe me anything." But then, it might have been another unsteady exhalation. Kendra decided that it was the latter. "Stay safe, Maya," she said, her voice lilting down to something that was almost her ordinary softness. "I'll come back and find you when this is all over. I promise." They did not look at each other as Kendra hefted her friend onto her back. They both knew the lie when they heard it. As it began to rain, the world shrank. The tree was buffeted in hard sheets of drops, cold and heavy as pennies flung over a beggar. Visibility eroded until she could see no more than a few paces ahead of her. She had the vague notion that she was on a narrow ledge cut into the trunk, dimly remembered as much as seen. It was treacherous and steep, the wind pushing her over even as the water ran underfoot. But each time that she was sure she had made the damning misstep that would send her spinning away on the wind, just another raindrop in the storm, she felt Adrian lay a steadying hand against her. That hand, bony but resolute, was a doom of its own, an inescapable certainty that they would not fall while he still drew breath. So they went on, ascending ever upwards into the sightless and turbulent night. In a way, she was grateful for that climb, even as her arms and legs grew leaden and her shoulders complained under their load. The world beyond was washed away for a time, a gray sea churning indistinctly, leaving only herself on that ledge, and the body still burning with fever heat at her back. She supposed she was being selfish again. If anything went wrong, if this foolhardy climb ended badly, then Maya was quite right. There was simply no way to predict the consequences. Still, the idea of turning back now was repellent, full of a noxious, choking shame. Caleb would die, and for what? For all those faraway people? No. It would be the result of her own weakness, her fear to take what was coming to her. Some indeterminate time into their journey, the wall that had guided her through the night turned suddenly inwards, forming an alcove in the trunk. It was small, but dry, and it kept the wind off them. With a gesture that was almost certainly invisible, Kendra indicated a stop to Adrian. They crammed tightly into the space, trembling with exertion, the heat of the three bodies pressed together easing a little of that frigid numbness. To one side, Adrian began to flitter and vibrate as if shaking water from invisible wings. With surprise, Kendra saw Caleb's eyes were open, a dull glow of crimson glinting under heavy lids, a fire cooling to its embers. "Hey there, fancy seeing you up. Are you doing all right?" The question rang foolish amid her labored panting, but at least she did not have to shout over the wind here. Faintly, Caleb laughed. "I feel like my blood is about to boil out my ears, but apart from that, I'm quite lovely. And yourself?" "Oh, I'm swell. I could walk all night," Kendra said, trying to reassure him. "Give me half a minute to rest, and we'll be off again, and have you fixed up in no time." "It's a dangerous thing, making promises you don't know you can actually keep," he rebuked her, mild and without any real anger. Somehow that made it all the harder to take. "I'm going to get you that help," she replied hotly, "no matter what it takes. That's a promise you can count on." Caleb only watched her, impassive. "It's even more foolhardy to make promises that you can keep but shouldn't." She stared, feeling ridiculous in her agitation before his weary and placid calm. "It's your fever talking," she said finally, trying desperately to feel reasonable. "You don't know what you're saying. This isn't something I should do, it's something I have to do. So quit your fussing. Rest up and let me save you already." "You don't have to do anything, Kendra. No one does. Everything everyone does, they decide to do it. There's always a choice." He paused, sounding terribly tired, closing his eyes a moment and engulfing them into near total darkness. "And choose to let you die?" she asked incredulously. "That's no choice at all." He opened his eyes again, and something stirred, strong and vital. Still, when he laid his hand on hers, it was carefully gentle. "I knew the risks when I decided to fight. I chose that. The circumstances aren't ideal, certainly, but they never are. I determined what I wanted, and I pursued it. I could never regret that. Indeed, I can ask for no more." "Well, it's my choice to save you. What I want is for you to not die, damn it. You can't die because of me." She had hoped to sound defiant, but it came out strangled, her throat constricting. He sighed, and she thought he had fallen back into feverish unconsciousness. But some time later he spoke once more, faint as a dream. "You know there are much worse things than dying. Ask yourself, is this really what you want? Is it for my sake, or do you just think this is what you deserve?" She looked at him, startled, but his eyes were closed again, and his breathing steadied out into a restless slumber. When she could stand again, they went on. Adrian helped such as he was able, spindly arms straining to support Caleb's legs, but the bulk of the labor was left to Kendra. It was a Herculean effort, but in truth, she hardly noticed. She walked relentlessly into the keening wind and the rain, stinging her cheeks and wearing blisters into her feet, but her mind held its own court. Caleb was wrong. Of that she was sure. She could no more choose to turn aside than she could step over the abyss and choose not to fall. It simply wasn't the way of the world. Sooner or later, everyone received what they were due. There were exceptions, but not for foolish and disfigured rich girl runaways who'd already used up all the chances anyone could ask for. It was a guilty thought, but in a way, the imperative of Caleb's wound came with a sense of relief. She had not been sure that she could take these last steps to meet her victim, Ilya, face to face. It was cowardly, but then she was a coward. She knew the reasons for her journey, but they were abstract, impersonal, the needs of a faceless multitude. Drawing nearer to that anguish, that righteous fury, each step was a little harder than the last. But she could do it now. She could bear any judgment, could dash herself upon the rocks of that impossible grief. For Caleb, she could do it. The sky was turning palest gray, and Kendra realized that they had been walking all night. Caleb had precious little time remaining. Suddenly, the ledge turned inwards from its perilous upward spiral, and there was a feeling of strange finality. It was like coming home after a long journey, and it was like the approach to the gallows. It was time.